All right, hello, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are dialing in from today. I see we have a really global audience today, so hello and welcome. All right, so let's get into the meat and potatoes of today's presentation by first letting me introduce myself. So for those of you who do not know me, haven't seen one of the webinars I've done for Trend Hunter in the past, I'm Armida, or Army. I'm the Chief Content Officer here at Trend Hunter, which essentially means I oversee the curation of all of the trend content that informs our trend research products. It's also kind of up to me to figure out how this content is articulated and for whom, which is why I am our head futurist, who is our team of keynote speakers, workshop facilitators, and thought leaders across different trend categories. Now, Trend Hunter as a whole has the goal of helping our clients create the future. So before we get into that TH101 content, I want to tell you a bit about how we do that. Most importantly, behind all of our services, we have our #1 trend platform, our online magazine, trendhunter.com, which essentially fuels all of the trend products you may have heard of, from our custom research reports to our trend dashboard, our keynotes and workshops like the ones I oversee, and of course, our CEO Jeremy's New York Times best-selling books. And we like to think of each of these things less as individual products and services to pick up and put down whenever you need them, and more as parts of a program that can keep you and your team thinking about trends and innovation all year round. Now, what really excites me about the futurist content, like what you'll see today, is that it's an example of what happens when you actually use that system. As a futurist, me and my team of futurists do use that system that we offer to our clients to put together our key frameworks, like our 6 patterns of opportunity and our 18 megatrends. So let me explain what exactly the patterns of opportunity are. The patterns of opportunity function as a tool through which you can view any problem on your plate to productionize more creative solutions. Essentially, we curated the patterns of opportunity by looking at the most successful products and services on our online magazine, as well as having conversations with the innovators that we had relationships with to figure out how they came up with their most successful ideas. Now, what we found is that these innovators typically followed one of 6 different ways of thinking. That's what the patterns of opportunity are. So for example, acceleration is all about moving upward and onward. It's about hyper-focusing on something specific to achieve aspirational positioning or even reaching a sense of perfection. Trends repeat themselves, and taking advantage of cyclicality can look like nostalgia, generational targeting, seasonality, etc. Reduction is all about the power of omission or specialization. So it's about removing something from your product, your service, your brand, your project, in order to make it easier to understand and socialize. Redirection is about taking consumer expectations and leveraging them in a different direction entirely. So kind of going against the grain of what's expected of you to surprise and delight. Convergence is what I often like to call the opposite of reduction, because it's about adding layers, combining ideas, collaboration. And most popular, we have our divergence pattern, which is all about the act of rebelling against the mainstream. So thinking about what's expected of you in your industry and doing essentially the opposite to really shock and surprise. So as I said, the way to use the patterns of opportunity is to sort of think of them as a lens through which you can view any problem you have on your plate. And although they're an awesome tool, we realized that they work almost entirely from the top down. They are based in the practices of already successful people, innovators who've already proven that they can come up with creative ideas. But they aren't necessarily rooted in consumer centricity. We wanted something that works from the bottom up because, of course, we can't talk about trends without talking about consumer desire. So what we did is we took a deep dive of each of these patterns of opportunity to see how they're actually manifesting in the market. What consumer desires do these patterns of opportunity satisfy? And that's how we came up with our 18 Megatrends matrix, which is the bulk of what we're going through today. So sit back, relax, because I'm running you through all 18 of these megatrends, going by which pattern they are associated with. So let's kick off with acceleration. Before we get into the megatrends, a little bit more about acceleration. Some of the sub-patterns under acceleration, which if you remember is a pattern that's all about moving upward and onward, include perfecting one thing, positioning as an aspirational icon, exaggerating one key feature, or even reimagining one specific solution. The megatrends within acceleration include prosumerism, artificial intelligence, and catalyzation. So let's kick off with artificial intelligence. Now, artificial intelligence as a megatrend is not solely about AI technology. It's about the general idea that the information age has brought us into an era defined by exponential growth in data, robotics, intelligence, and the way these technologies enhance human capability. Now, of course, that does include AI technology, but it's not just about AI technology. It's about making these technologies accessible to people to make their lives easier, which is what happens with Ross, the super intelligent attorney that uses IBM's Watson. Another great example of how these awesome technologies are being used to increase human capacity is the late great architect Zaha Hadid's perfect chair. Now, what her firm did is use, yes, artificial intelligence technology, but also 3D printing to very rapidly and accurately figure out what design for a chair would marry both beauty and top-tier function. 3D printing or additive manufacturing is a great way of articulating the AI megatrend as well, because it can do things like create homes for more affordable housing. We can 3D print food to try to solve world hunger. We can 3D print body parts to enhance what's happening in the medical industry. So again, artificial intelligence as a megatrend is about technology to increase human achievement. Now, I think a great example of this is anti-bias artificial intelligence. Here we see artificial intelligence technology integrating neutrality features across different industries. Now, I think this has really great applications for many different organizations in many different categories. Think, for example, what this could mean about recruiting practices. Of course, what this could mean in the actual tech industry, what this could mean in health, what this could mean in automotive. Put simply, AI, the megatrend, is about technology as a way to enhance human capability, intelligence, and achievement. So one question to consider, what technology is available to you and how could it be used to move society forward? Now up next, we have prosumerism. Prosumerism is one of my favorite megatrends. It's based in the idea that every person wants to have their voice heard. And that's easier to do than ever with the use of social media. So from user-generated content to maker culture, today's consumers are content creators. They are experts. They are both having their voices heard and enriching their skills through the use of the internet. This has been especially prominent over the last couple of years of the pandemic. According to Namrata Murladhar, who's the director of marketing at LinkedIn Learning, using time in furlough to invest in personal growth and learning relevant new skills can help people maintain confidence and motivation. This may be why 40% of consumers were actively seeking how-to videos during quarantine, and closer to today, 50 million people consider themselves to be creators online. Now, one of our insights or macro trends that speaks really well to this is e-learning entertainment. Here we see consumers are increasingly learning new skills for fun, not just for employment. I'm sure we've all browsed, the Masterclass website to look at what skills we can learn to make us more employable. But for consumers today, this form of self-education is not just for making them more employable and eventually making more money. It's to learn new skills, enrich your life, enrich your sense of purpose, and in many ways become more creative. Now, what that means is expectations of content from brands have skyrocketed because consumers are now experts who are self-educated across different topics. So one question to consider for prosumerism: how are you enriching your customer? All right, let's move into our final megatrend under acceleration, which is catalyzation, one of the most important of all of the megatrends. It's based in the idea that every person wants to become a better person and in the process make the world a better place. And so catalyzation poses the question of whether or not brands can be the catalyst for that betterment. 80% of consumers say that solving society's problems should matter most for brands today. And a whopping 88% want brands and companies to help them make a difference in the causes that they care about. Now, there are a few brands who are really well-known case studies for doing this catalyzation work, and I think Ben & Jerry's is one of them. They have been in the social good game since 1988 when they started making ice cream. Now, what I love about Ben & Jerry's and their approach to social good is that it's not just about a corporate social responsibility campaign. It's not just about changing the branding to align to a cause. They show frequent shift in product. They show frequent shift in their larger term strategy to accommodate the causes that they care about. As well, they make clear statements on their beliefs and their values. Not everyone agrees with Ben & Jerry's politics, but that's kind of the point. For these causes in very unexpected ways. They are right there, walking alongside consumers in protests. They are right there sharing their opinions on topics that are quite divisive. Now, one insight that shows we're seeing more and more of this is systemic corporate social responsibility. Here we see consumers call for ever more authentic forms of CSR that aren't just about marketing, but are in fact about using the resources that these big brands have to actually make a difference in the systems that are unjust. Brands need to view activism as a requirement of doing business, not as a requirement of getting customers. Catalyzation is about people wanting to make the world a better place and wanting to buy from brands that will support that. What is one cause your brand isn't involved in yet, but is authentically connected to? So that wraps us up for the megatrends under acceleration. Let's move on to reduction. Now, reduction, if you remember, is all about the power of omission. Within it, we have the subpatterns of specialization, efficiency, crowdsourcing, and subscription. The megatrends here include instant entrepreneurship, simplicity, and curation. So let's kick off with instant entrepreneurship. Instant entrepreneurship is the idea that every consumer wants a sense of autonomy. Every person wants to eventually be able to work for themselves and fully be themselves. And with the use of the different tools we have available to us online, it's easier than ever to conceptualize, fund, and launch a small business. One awesome example of this is Michaela Ulmer. This is an actual photo of Michaela on your screen. This is not a stock photo. She started Me and the Bees Lemonade when she was just 9 years old. I believe she's a junior in high school now. And it was such a simple concept. Lemonade sweetened with honey with a mission to save the bees. Now, being a member of Gen Z, she knew exactly how to take this idea online and make it happen. And now, just a few years later, her product, Me and the Bees Lemonade, is distributed at Whole Foods, Kroger's, and is probably going to be international pretty soon. In times of chaos, this is even more prevalent because people often become more determined, more resourceful, more creative, and more motivated to work for themselves, to be autonomous. In fact, so many of the iconic brands we know started in times of difficulty because chaos breeds innovation. This may be why there was 125% growth of the Etsy marketplace in Q2 2020 alone. That is huge. As well, 99.9% of all businesses in the USA are small businesses. This is as of 2021, and I'm sure this number is on the rise as well. Now, one insight that looks at how this is happening on a smaller scale is entrepreneurial push. Here we see more individuals embarking on the path of entrepreneurship amid COVID-19 with assistance from different services and sometimes even larger brands. We see things like business launching retail kiosks or ad campaigns that are based in how to launch a culinary empire during the pandemic. Instant entrepreneurship is about the idea that chaos breeds innovation and anyone can disrupt your industry. How are you prepared for the boom of small businesses in both supply and demand? All right, so our next megatrend under reduction is curation, a term I'm certain we've all heard before. It's the idea of hyper-targeted offerings, services, subscriptions, and recommendations because consumers want their lives to be simplified. They want to have better things, they want to have fewer things. Now, almost the godfather of this idea of curation is Barry Schwartz. Barry Schwartz is the author of The Paradox of Choice, which is also a TED Talk of the same kiosks at grocery stores selling jam. One kiosk had 6 options. One kiosk offered 24 options, all very creative. And interestingly enough, among the people who visited each of those kiosks, 30% of the people who visited the 6-option kiosk bought jam, and only 3% of the people who visited the 24-option kiosk bought jam. It's all about that analysis paralysis, right? People don't necessarily want more choices, they want better choices. An extreme example of this is Morioka Shoten, which is a library in Japan that only features one book at a time, kind of like a brick and mortar form of a book club. Now, one example of this for the digital age is alternative curation. Here we see brands, artists, and influencers offer distinct forms of curation that solidify their personal brands and their position as influencers in this day and age. So think of mood-themed virtual shops or drive-through outdoor museums. Curation is about saving consumers the energy of needing to engage in guesswork. What is one small choice you can simply make for your customer? Now we get to our final megatrend within the pattern of reduction, simplicity. Aptly named, simplicity, just like the reduction pattern itself, is about the power of omission, especially during chaotic times. People tend to be drawn to streamlining, to minimalism, to this idea of just simplifying their lives in general. Now, one of my favorite examples of simplicity in, pre-pandemic times is Glossier. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar, Glossier is a cosmetics brand that came out in, I believe it was 2015, maybe 2016, with a much more simplistic mission than everything else in the cosmetics industry. Now, this was the era of influencer makeup, right? 2015, 2016, we saw a lot of contouring, we saw a lot of layering. It was makeup that looked like makeup. It was by no means no makeup. But Glossier came with the return of that no makeup look. One other thing about the cosmetics industry at the time, since it was the era of influencer makeup and there was this really fast-paced social media community around the cosmetics industry, they were thinking, the more products we release, the more innovative we will be. Glossier did the exact example and released with a handful of smart hero products, which still to this day are their best sellers. Lastly, the cosmetics industry, again in an attempt to keep up with that fast-paced community, figured the more distribution, the better. Our products should all be hyper-visible across different retailers. Again, Glossier did the opposite. They were direct-to-consumer, and to a degree, they still are today. They have a few brick-and-mortar stores in metropolitan cities, but they're more like showrooms where you can take a beautiful selfie. Now, post-pandemic, simplicity is even more important because it provides respite from all of the chaos. I think a really great example of this that I consider to be extremely important is relaxed workplace. This is a macro trend where we see that as offices reopen post-pandemic, they need to have more of a focus on relaxation and wellness as opposed to heavy gamification and productivity. We've all had a tough couple of years, so it's about kind of taking things a little easier and simplifying the process of working. Simplicity is the power of streamlining to make life a little bit easier. So one question to consider, how can you make one aspect of your customer's life easier for them? Now that wraps us up for the megatrends under reduction and takes us into convergence. Now, convergence follows the sub-patterns of combination, collaboration, and layering ideas. So let's jump right into it with multisensation. Multisensation is a megatrend that looks at technology, augmented reality, virtual reality, and interactive experiences, raising our expectations in the realms of entertainment, retail, and even food. And about 55% of Americans across generations prefer to stay in and enjoy themselves at home. This, of course, is especially true over the past couple of years when really at-home entertainment has taken center stage as essentially one of the only ways we can enjoy ourselves safely. At-home entertainment is more important than ever, and new standards are being set for what it needs to look like. Now, a great example of this is metaverse. I know that we've all heard so much about what the metaverse is and what we can expect from it in the future. Put simply, the metaverse is essentially a more immersive version of the internet that we already interact with. And within it, we'll be able to, have avatars that act as projections of our real selves. We'll be able to buy blockchain-based virtual sneakers or own virtual real estate. Now, the reason why this is under multisensation is because it takes the concept of enjoying the internet visually or in an audio manner and takes it into a more real, more tangible space. Multisensation is about consumers becoming more accustomed to fully immersive experiences than ever before. So how could you make digital touchpoints with your customer more exciting and more immersive? Now up next, we have co-creation. Co-creation is the idea that as consumers become experts and gain their own voices through megatrends like prosumerism, brands, products, and consumers will become more interdependent and will need to co-create our future together. Co-creation essentially allows you to leverage the insider info from the end user by involving them in the process of research and development. According to Raphael Schwartz, who's the managing director at Territory Influence, consumers are likely to view brands more positively when they're involved in product development. I think a really awesome example of this is food hacks. If you are essentially addicted to TikTok, like myself, you've probably been on Food Talk and you've seen a few of those viral recipes, right? Think of the feta and tomato pasta or whatever. Now, what we're seeing is as a result of the popularity of these recipes, these viral food trends are fueling customizable kits, menu items at restaurants and quick serve restaurants. So really interesting how this isn't explicit kind of co-creation from the very beginning, but an organic approach to co-creation out of necessity. Ultimately, co-creation is involving customers in developing new solutions as a way to empower them and your brand. So how can you involve customers in your innovation process? Now up next we have our last megatrend under the convergence pattern, which is hybridization. Hybridization is all about combining different ideas with the goal of blurring business models and blurring the categories of different industries. Now, this isn't necessarily something new, right? When Amazon first came out, they were a bookstore, then they were a tech store, then they were a web host, then a clothing retailer, then they acquired Whole Foods and became a grocery store. And now they're all of those things, which created an entirely new category altogether. Chaos, which we are still currently in, calls for transformation. Your industry will change and new competitors will arise. Now, one example of this that I think is very interesting is skincare clothing. Here we see a hybridization of the ever-popular skincare industry, which really had a boom over the past couple of years as people focused more on self-care, and this idea of leisure wear, which of course also increased in popularity as many places were still on lockdown. Toronto still is to a degree. And so combining these two things, we see clothing items adapted with skin-friendly or enhancing materials. So hybridization is about layering ideas to create new categories and show adaptability when necessary. What's one adjacent industry that you would like to tap for inspiration? Now that takes us to the through our 18 megatrends. I'm going to pause and take a little sip of water. Okay, let's get back to it. So next we have the megatrends under our cyclicality pattern. Cyclicality looks at the sub-patterns of retro, generational, economic and seasonal, and repetitive cycles. As I said earlier, cyclicality is about the idea that trends repeat themselves. So within it, of course, we have nostalgia, youthfulness, and naturality. Let's start with naturality. Naturality is all about the desire for sustainable products, including local, organic, recyclable, and pronounceable ingredients. So in a way, it does connect to catalyzation, except with more of this message of returning to a sense of purity. 8 in 10 consumers indicate sustainability is important to them. But what is important to note is that personal intentions are not the same as sustainable consumerism, because sustainability is not just a matter of individual responsibility. It's also about the ways in which brands, like many of you watching, can step up to help make eco-consciousness more mainstream and easier to practice. Carbon Negative is a great example of this. Here we see brands committed to the environment actually using carbon to create new products. So yes, you've heard all about carbon neutrality, but now this is about how to actually take carbon waste and use it to make things like hand sanitizers, to make things like knitwear, to make things like beer or ice cream. In fact, there is even an entire catalog full of carbon negative gifts. Naturality is the idea of protecting the environment, not just to ensure a better future, but to ensure any future at all. How can your brand be more sustainable without relying on customers to make it happen? Now up next, we have the ever-popular nostalgia. Nostalgia is what it sounds like. It's the megatrend that looks at fond memories, fueling a desire to bring the past into the present, especially with respect to one's formative years. Now, one of the examples of nostalgia that is nearest and dearest to me is Pokemon Go. You remember back in 2016 and 2017 when Pokemon Go was at its peak? I was playing the game a lot. I was definitely one of those people on the street kind of trying to figure out where I could find the most rare Pokemon, and this meme is basically about me. How to kidnap 30-something-year-olds in 2016. I probably would have gotten into that van. Now, at its peak, people were spending triple the amount of time on the Pokemon Go app than they would spend on Instagram, which is wild if you are somebody who loves Instagram. But one of the things that makes Pokemon Go so smart, and one of the reasons why I'm still talking about it today, is that it was such strategically timed nostalgia. It was nostalgia for people who were at an age where suddenly they had all of these adult responsibilities for a piece of pop culture that was popular when they were kids, running home from school to watch the actual cartoon Pokemon. But nostalgia's appeal is not just in remembering. That kind of strategic approach to nostalgia can also be in the feeling of returning to something without necessarily having to pull from pop culture's past. This is especially true during times of crisis and chaos because people crave simpler times. A great example of this is the phenomenon of cottagecore. Now, for those who are unfamiliar, cottagecore, also sometimes known as farmcore or countrycore, is a sort of aesthetic movement inspired by romanticized interpretation of Western agricultural life. It's all about baking your own bread, living in a flower-covered cottage, dressing like, you sewed your own clothes, maybe even learning how to sew your own clothes. Interestingly enough, cottagecore is extremely popular among Gen Z, who are the most virtual of all of the generations. Now, this idea of cottagecore is not just something that lives on social media anymore. It's impacting a ton of different industries. In farm aesthetic, we see the cottagecore lifestyle changing the fashion industry, the interior design industry, the CPG industry. Nostalgia is all about escapism through fond memories from the past, traditions, or general simpler times. So the question to consider here, how can you provide some sense of nostalgia to your customers? And lastly, for our megatrends under cyclicality, we have youthfulness. Youthfulness is the general idea that age is completely being redefined, especially in regards to older consumers who are not your grandma's grandma, right? Becoming older is no longer about the stereotypes of just staying home and, I don't know, watching TV. Now it's about continuing to enrich your life with new experiences. But of course, the definition of what it means to age is always disrupted in times of change. When things are normal, or what we call the path dependency era here at Trend Hunter, generational behavior is very predictable. It's very linear, right? You take the formula of the age that a generation is at and you combine it with their shared experience. Or baby boomers love to travel when they're retired. But as I said, unprecedented situations create chaos and reset generational behavior. And what we've seen over the past couple of years is Generation Z redefining childhood, millennials growing out of that eternal youth, Generation X focusing more on family experiences, and, as I said earlier, baby boomers surprising us by becoming really active on social media. Now, one of our insights or macro trends that really encompasses this is intergenerational tech. Here we see connecting family members virtually becoming easier post-pandemic, specifically because older generations have become increasingly comfortable using that technology. Youthfulness is the idea that age is a choice and is redefined further in times of volatility. How can you help your customers redefine the stereotypes of their age group? That wraps us up for the megatrends under cyclicality, moving right along to redirection. Now, if you remember earlier, redirection is a pattern that is focused in the idea of acknowledging what consumers expect of you and taking it in a different direction entirely. And so the sub-patterns here include refocusing, reversing, surprising, or gamifying. Now let's kick off with the megatrend of gamification. Gamification is the application of game dynamics to real-world problems, resulting in a world that's more competitive and more engaging. It's about this idea of incentivization, and that incentive can be tangible or intangible. Ultimately, gamification is most useful when it makes the unexciting more exciting. A really great example of this is the Helix roller coaster. Now, ironically, the Helix roller coaster is one of the fastest roller coasters in the world with one of the slowest moving lineups. What they decided to do was create a gamified app for those who are waiting in line since, the lineup averaged 3 hours. But that app was not just for distracting them with a video game while they were waiting. It actually gave them the tangible incentive of being able to compete with other people in line to advance the lineup entirely, so creating a kind of real-time competition. Now, one way this can be applied to making mundane tasks easier is gamified banking. Here we see child-friendly banking apps and tools use gamification to kind of demystify this sometimes overly complex idea of money management at a very young age. As I said, gamification is meant to make the mundane more exciting through a sense of tangible or intangible accomplishment. What is the least desirable part of your customer's experience, and how can you turn it into the best part? Now up next, we have experience. Really great segue after gamification. Experience is probably one of the most elusive but popular megatrends that I'm asked about. In a world abundant with stuff, experience becomes a more important currency and life priority. People want to build up unforgettable memories. They want to have experiences that will forever be near and dear to their hearts, and those things are starting to become more valuable than actual material goods. Especially among the millennial set. 46% of young millennials have nothing saved for retirement. However, 65% of them have travel savings. So this does speak to what's important to this generation en masse. Now, of course, the ability to experience things like travel is just reopening. And whether you are a business within the world of travel and tourism, that relies on experience, I want you to know that as we reopen, it's not about replicating old experiences. It's about enhancing experiences to suit new needs. One example of this that is shaking up every industry because it looks at employment and the way that consumers, especially younger consumers, view it is digital nomad. Here we see countries are now encouraging remote workers to live within their borders in a manner that feels more like a vacation than it does like work. Ultimately, working from home for necessity has created a preference for working remotely. We know we have the technology for it. Many companies have developed the managing skills for it. And so a certain set of consumers are looking to work in this much more autonomous way. All because it provides additional experience. Experience as a megatrend is about the fact that consumers expect every aspect of their lives to be somewhat of an adventure, somewhat of an experience. So how can you add a bit of adventure to the way consumers experience your brand? All right, so lastly for the megatrends under redirection, we have tribalism. Now, tribalism is, again, connected to catalyzation and that idea of making the world a better place, but through the lens of connecting people, of creating these sort of communities, sometimes within your brand and fandom for it, but sometimes within a greater sort of sense of purpose. Now, this idea of joining around a greater sense of purpose is something that we often observe in the world when faced with difficult times. We saw it in World War II. We saw it after 9/11. We see it with climate change, and we see it with the recent resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement. Like I said, in times of crisis, people turn to one another for support. And that support can come by way of activism, by way of discussion, by way of celebration. Virtual Pride is a great example of this. So during the pandemic, we saw brands launching digital Pride events to help the community come together and continue to celebrate even if they weren't able to do so in person. Tribalism looks at the fact that consumers want to feel connected to one another by more meaningful elements than just traditional segmentation. So how are you bringing people together? So that sums us up for the megatrends under redirection and takes us to our final set of megatrends for today and, of course, our final pattern. Now, as I said, divergence is actually one of the more popular patterns of opportunity because I think it's quite easy to understand and, frankly, a lot of fun to execute. Divergence is about going against the mainstream, and who doesn't love a little bit of rebellion? The sub-patterns under divergence include personalization or customization, a sense of status or sense of belonging, style and fashionizing, which is about the idea of almost ornamentation when it isn't necessary. We're looking at the stereotypes of what it means to be a specific age and going against them entirely. The megatrends within divergence include authenticity, many-to-many, and personalization. So let's kick off with personalization. Personalization is what it sounds like. It's the idea of personalizing products and services to one individual's needs. Small batch production technologies and more personalized media are increasing the expectation for this sort of customization. But most importantly, it helps consumers be themselves and express their uniqueness, not just in the way that they carry themselves, but in the products that they buy and the services that they interact with. 80% of consumers are more likely to make a purchase from a brand that provides personalized experiences. Now, one very popular example of how we're seeing this is with printed supplement. Here we see vitamins and supplements personalized with the 3D printing technology in an industry that would most benefit from this, which is in the wellness space. Now, a lot of conversations surrounding wellness and the definition of self-care have been happening over the past couple of years, but one thing I think we can all agree on is what makes a person healthy and what they need to feel truly sort of well is a pretty subjective thing, is a very personal sort of matter. And so leveraging personalization in the wellness space is a really great example of maximizing that megatrend. Now, regardless of the category you're coming from, personalization is about the idea that a custom item or experience will create a true connection with your customer. So what opportunities for personalization could be integrated into your brand? Up next, we have authenticity. Now, similar to what I said about experience, this is one of the most popular megatrends and also one of the most elusive. It's one of those terms that we hear a lot about, but it's very difficult to define, very difficult to nail down, and even more difficult to execute properly. Now, as a megatrend, authenticity is about the idea that increased social media use and a resistance to traditional advertising has created a real desire for reality, for something that feels genuine and something that changes very frequently. What we define as authentic is ever evolving. Now, a great example of this, a great case study, is influencers. Influencers have been seen as a standard for authenticity for a long time because they're relatable, or at least more relatable than what we used to. Still true. Are influencers still relatable when the average influencer now positions their lives as aspirational? I know the average person is not as fit as this person, is perhaps not as happy as this person, and I don't know about you, my closet is not nearly as beautiful as your average fashion influencers. Only 15% of consumers say that they trust influencers. Especially in times of crisis, aspiration and crisis do not mix. What does mix is realism and crisis. In times of chaos and crisis, people want information. They want to feel connected to other people in a very authentic way. And so one really great example of how we're seeing the world of influencers evolve is with brand activists. Here we see influencers replaced by representatives of social change in online campaigns to move beyond this idea that we should aspire to be, more fit, more happy, and have more beautiful closets, and instead look at how we can all be agents of change in a positive way. Authenticity is about the fact that modern definitions of what's real are ever evolving. What parts of your brand are perceived as disingenuous and why? A very difficult question to think about. Okay, now up next, I think we have our final megatrend for today, which is many-to-many. Now, I like to think of many-to-many as a sort of evolution megatrend. I believe that prosumerism things and become creators. Instant entrepreneurship is what happens when those prosumers actually turn those ideas and that creativity into a business. And to me, many-to-many is a world that's created when more people engage in instant entrepreneurship. Many-to-many shifting the world into an economy where we are interdependent. This is especially popular as we see the rise of a sort of anti-e-commerce sentiment. People are no longer as impressed by large brands that are providing instant gratification and unparalleled convenience because they have a concern for the environment, because they prefer to support local mom-and-pop shops. 78% of consumers say that the pandemic has made it more important than ever to give back to their local communities. But why do consumers in larger and larger numbers want to support small businesses? Well, first off, there's that sense of community. Second, often small businesses are more environmentally sound because of small batch production. There is this idea of age. Local can be defined as your community online or your literal physical proximity. And most importantly, small businesses are seen as more trustworthy. 47.3% of USA workforce is employed by small businesses as well. So as I said, that idea of local economy can mean many different things. Now, one way that we're seeing this move forward in the post-pandemic age is with accessible peer-to-peer payment. Here we're seeing brands helping users send and receive money across borders for both social good and engaging with small businesses from different places amid COVID-19. Many to Many is about the consumer needing a sense of community more than ever and wanting to support real people. How are you battling big brand skepticism, if you are a big brand? And if you're not, how do you plan to optimize the growing sentiment of big brand skepticism? Now that wraps us up for our megatrends under divergence, and that actually wraps us up for all of our megatrends. As a quick review of what we went over today, we talked a bit about the patterns of opportunity, which function as a sort of lens through which you can view any problem on your plate. Acceleration is all about focusing on that repeating themselves. Reduction is about the power of omission. Redirection is about moving against consumer expectations and redirecting what's expected of you. Convergence is about combining ideas, and divergence is about that sense of rebellion. Now, the megatrends are a sort of way to execute on each of these patterns of opportunity in a way that connects to true consumer desire. Now, if you're interested in seeing a more sort of interactive megatrends map, please visit trendhunter.com/pro, and you can check out more about how we're seeing each of the megatrends and patterns manifest on our trend platform. So thank you again, everyone, for joining today. I see a few people this is why I kept scrolling through, a few people asked about accessibility of this presentation after today, so you do get that recording. You will be able to watch it later. And yes, please keep your eyes here in this sort of Trend Hunter webinar space as we continue with our Trend Hunter 101 series. Thank you so much.